Hello, everybody. Yes, thank you, Omar. Thank you, Leslie, and also Coco that it was behind also collaborating with that and helping me in this. So thank you for IDS and Cooper Union and everybody. So I'm just here in your disposal. So I don't know how to do this because you mentioned very ambitious things, ambitious in terms of epistemology, as you said, Omar. So anyway, it's a little bit problematic to because I'm to expose my work, especially for an audience that probably don't know very well or maybe have no partially knowledge about Cuban cultural policies and also even reality. So and also talk about my work that is very interconnected with this. So I think let's start to talk a little bit about history because it's related with my work. We have to understand that one of the basic and fundamental struggle between the intellectuals and power and political power in Cuba, it started at the very beginning of the Cuban Revolution. So, and always the Cuban government played with this idea that he's offering something to the society, to the society itself, but at the same time, he's offering something to themselves. The first Cuban law was that was a kind of decree of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. It was the creation of the Institute of, it was in March, the Institute of Cinema, the ICAIC, and it was playing like a kind of double tool because it was one of the desired instrument for many Cuban intellectuals from the previous years against the Batista dictatorship. So that it was the aspiration to have an independent cinema or cinema with the that is washing to the other part of the Cuban society, the poor, the humble people, those areas that were not covered by the Batista regime. So ICAI was covering these countryside people, but at the same time was covering the ideas of the same Cuban Revolution, the propaganda, and also the emergent socialist way to understand the society in the very beginning. So at those years started the problems because ICAI at the same time was in charge to ban one of the most important movies, kind of exercise, cinematographic or exercise, that it was PM. It was a movie directed by Orlando Jimenez Leal and Saba Cabrera. And then the problem started the polemic or this debate about who is in charge of culture in Cuba. The reality, the real intellectual, the intellectual that were in the street and they were in the doing art by themselves, and they wanted to be a little more free, or the government. So who's decreeing, who's creating a decree of art? The government of the society itself, the society that in fact, as was proclaimed and claimed by the revolution, the society who made the revolution. It was not a group of only one independent movement as the 26 July movement or other group. So Fidel Castro claimed that the society, the Cuban society, made the revolution. Intellectuals make the revolution. Artists make the revolution. Fighters make the revolution. The resistance, the communists, the anarchists, the bourgeois, even bourgeois parties. So the black people, everybody make the revolution. So then we started to understand a configuration of cultural space that already still today in Cuba. Who the revolution belongs to whom, and who's doing this revolution. And also we can understand the revolution not in terms of progressive policies. We have to understand the revolution in terms of art and culture, design, memory. So I try to expose a little bit these things here with my work, and I will try to put certain examples. So I'm going to present you here. You saw the screen, it's okay? I'm going to present here several works that I do in the last exhibition in Berlin, and it was called prophylactic culture. Prophylactic culture came from this term of prophylaxis, which means also prevention. Propaganda could work also as prevention, As a prevention measure, you don't commit a crime, not any kind of crime. I'm talking about political crimes. I'm talking about things that are very rigorous, understood in the political arena. So also working with this idea of designs from early 60s, 70s, and 80s, I try to reconfigure, and I try to understand many symbols that are also working in that area. I understand that language and icons are very interconnected, you know, in the kind of semiological area and also in the semantical way. So I try to combine text with image and text that are belongs to the format of the socialist government in Cuba, and they also put it in function of their interests. It could be educative, pedagogical, art, cultural, but at the same time are repressive in certain way because they are working in that manner. Prophylaxis itself is a term that came from medical, the medical sphere, but also is implemented, as I notice a lot in the Cuban police lexico, is also they use it a lot in the military and police. So they always said, I'm going to do with you prophylaxis, I'm going to prevent you. And this is a very interesting way because it's the kind of psychological dimension inside the police state, how always they are doing prophylaxis in any manners, in cinema, in newsreels, in propaganda itself, in art, in culture, in education, and even in the sport. I understand that we have this kind of dimension of semi or totally prophylaxis society where everything have to be prevented from going to their wrong political path. These words are part of this, and every symbol that you can see here have a distinguish and a specific meaning related with certain things. And I'm going to put your example of this kind of work. And at the same time, the exhibition covered one of the an historical event in Cuba, that there was the imprisonment of a Cuban artist and poet and writer, Alberto Padilla, in 1971. And then also the subsequent debates that there were between Cuban intellectuals and also intellectuals abroad, especially in France. It was like a tectonic shift when Alberto Padilla was detained in 1971. And I'm sorry here for explaining you this probably very inner historical facts, and then you can make me the question about specific things, but this was very important. And the exhibition that I made in Berlin was part of this research and this presentation. But I'm going to speak more about symbols and icons, but I can put you an example a little bit then about Padilla's self-repentance letter that he made, and you can describe also, you can find there many of these ideas of how psychological, how can I say, psychological manners are employed in the way to try to rehabilitate or to change the mind of intellectual that go for that wrong path. So exhibition was composed of this big installation. One, if a hand-cut paper made by hand, as in the same 60s. I like to draw and to work, but at the same time, it's a direct reference to the aesthetic that it was around on those years. And to tell you the truth, it's the aesthetic that is still around in Cuba. We are very analogical society, still in this analogical tempo. So this is one of the example that also I like. And also this is my particular obsession. I was training in drawing and painting as the, if I can say it, like a very Russian style that still when I was studying art in Havana, and it's a kind of like a giving back the message. So here you can see a few examples. For instance, I can tell you something about this DGI that you can say in the left corner. This is the Directorio General de Inteligencia or Departamento General de Inteligencia. This is the General Intelligence Directory in Cuba, who is in charge of is a kind of a CIA, if we can call it like that. I don't know, nobody knows exactly if it's still working, if it's still operative with the same functions that it was in the 60s and 70s, but I try to work with these acronyms also. This is a kind of very interesting institution, intelligence institution in Cuba in the 60s and 70s. And I was working sometimes with this basic idea to illustrate those symbols, these symbols that normally visual artists are not eager to demonstrate or to show, because it could bring you to a possible censorship or a possible jail, in fact, or not a possible at all, probably in the totality, you know. So we can see here also Nicaraguan, a Nicaraguan women with the AK-47 that they were provided by the Cuban directory, this Cuban departamento, this department. And I just make a comment on that. I make a comment of Cuban interference in the Central American civil wars. So not only Nicaragua, also El Salvador, and even they were transferring some weapons even to Guatemala and those countries. This is just one example. And the other way, we can see in this in the right corner, where they said Bajanda Perra. I don't know if I have some example here. Bajanda Perra is like a, I don't know how to explain it. I'm sorry for the language, but Bajanda Perra is like a, you get out of here, bitch, something like that. No, so this is like a slogan that they used 2 years ago against few activists and artists that they were in a manifestation, or it was in the civic protest, Pacific protest, and they used this kind of a very direct and explicit language against the Cuban government, the Cuban undercover police. And I just do this juxtaposition with this Cuban militia women in those in the 70s and 60s and 70s, but in the juxtaposition of the somehow the role of the female use in this kind of paramilitary activities by the Cuban authorities. There are many works that I could explain a little bit more about that. For instance, in the center, we can see here, I don't know, here we can see here Roberto Padilla. I don't know if you're watching the close-up that I'm doing. This is Roberto Padilla in his allocution, his speech that he made in the UNIAC after he was released, after being many days in the Villa Marista prison and the high security prison for political detainees. And also we see here the symbol, the icon of the Congreso Nacional de Educación y Cultura, National Congress of Cuban, National Congress of Education and Culture. I just made work with this logo here, and I make this kind of book logo, and I make this kind of symbolic stuff around with the circles, a design very typical from the 70s, and with the image of Roberto Padilla. The interesting thing is that this Congress also was very important in how the culture was going to be treated in the future of the revolution. Culture was basically, after 1971, in absolutely hand of the Cuban government and of the communist policy. And basically artists have to be working totally in this position of the Cuban government. And Roberto Padilla was one of these examples of re-education and rehabilitation of political commentaries against Cuban government, and he was set as an example after being released. But at the same time, create this tectonic shift of artists that were not so in favor of the Cuban Revolution after the punishment of Roberto Padilla. Let me pass over because there are many. Let me see. Let me check fast. Here also, this is a fragment of the work. Also, this is a militia people in training exercise with the logo of the Communist Party, Cuban Communist Party here, and with the number 370. 370 is a special decree that it was enacted by the Cuban presidency in 2018, and it was in charge of taking care of the information that you put on internet with your mobile or with your computer or whatever. 370 is a decree that came after the 349 decree that it was specifically for artists and intellectuals to control their activities and their works. But this one came in the same kind of package. 370 punish basically any kind of commentary hostile to the Cuban government or to the Cuban revolution. But if you put it in the internet sphere. Here, this is a combination with the Communist Party logo, which is this one that is here. And I just put the 370 as a quote question, like what it is 370, what it is referring. It's just also to make an alert of what is happening in the Cuban society in the term of presidential decree that were not consulted by anybody. So basically it was attacking directly to the freedom of speech. Still doing. Now there are even more decrees. Now we have a new one that is the decree 35 and new penal codes. So you can see here in the corner also Congreso Nacional de Educación y Cultura. What I do is like that, like a kind of a stamp model, like a generic model. And also here in the corner, in the left corner, this is the view, aerial view of the Villa Marista prison when it was Alberto Padilla incarcerated. I made this kind of typical design with this shadow, but at the same time was in the jail that I was 50 years after Alberto Padilla. I was trying to be, they trying to persecute me, but I spent 3 months there. So this is another story that I have to do it in probably another, in another speech like that I'm doing. It's a bit complicated and it would take a long time. So I prefer just to go in a kind of a, just pass it over because it was a little bit complicated to what happened there. Spent 3 months and so on. After 50 years of Alberto Padilla, it's kind of mirroring situation. This is a quote that I take it from that appeared in Cuba in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So they said, let's do to the COVID un jirón. Hagamos del COVID un jirón. Jirón is, as the Cuban knows, Bay of Pig. And Bay of Pig for the Cuban government, for the Cuban propaganda, was like the defeat of the American US imperialism in Cuba. So they are proud of Bay of Pig. They are proud of Girón, what they did. And this basically they're saying here in a very grandiose pharaonic way, let's make from the COVID a Bay of Pig. So we're going to defeat them. Let's overcome over COVID. COVID as a new enemy, as a new enemy we have to defeat, and we have to put all the will. So I make with the text, I just take this kind of this kind of text that he was using in the 60s at the same time. And it's just also a reminder of how this thing somehow continue in Cuba. To keeping this same static, I do it intentionally, is because we have the same modus operandi at the same time in Cuba. We have the same things that we have in the 60s. Draconian cultural policy, political policies, civic policies. So I just trying to answer to the reality with the same tools, graphic tools that they were employing in the 60s and 70s. Departamento General de Inteligencia, as already I show you and explain a little bit with this design. Bajanda Perra, as already show you. This is the icon, only this yacht of the Unión de Juristas de Cuba. Basically the bar is like the bar association of the Cuban government, which they claim that it was Fidel Castro is his bigger teacher, because Fidel Castro was a lawyer. He graduated from Hamlet University as a lawyer. So I just make this and I do it like triple, which is very interesting because it's basically everybody's talking about this kind of bar association because they are in charge of the long and prolonged condemnation to the many of the Cubans that they were protesting of the 11th of July. As you can see, everything here is full of history. It's full of also omissions, because many of these things that I try to portray here, that's what I call it, the memory of the other memory of the Cuban Cultural Revolution, or the other memory for me is the most, because many of these icons, these symbols are not even known in Cuba. Probably you see it for the first time, but any Cuban in the street also can see it in the street for the first time. So why I use this methodology of this stencil type system, because I do it many in the street, to recover, to create this complicity between the domestic space of the workshop and also the street. So also I try to reactivate the memory by the freedom of speech commentary, to bring in the same symbols that the Cuban Revolution create, but at the same time, the same symbols that the Cuban Revolution tried to erase and try to omit. This is a symbol about energy in the 80s, to basically to save energy. I think now the whole world will have to save energy, especially also you see what is happening also in Europe and the United States. So we are in a constant struggle of saving everything in Cuba. But I think in one day, and I think it's happening right now, you're also going to be in that constant struggle. So it's a kind of commentary about that. It's a very weird icon, so I just bring it to light. And this is this, we have to be prepared to employ the energy that what really is necessary, and that we cannot spend not single kilowatt of electricity, no 1 gram of fuel or lubricant. This is very weird. For the year 1984, the year is wonderful because it's a. This one is the UNIAC. This one is the icon of. I mean, I always make some variation. I take the originals and I make variation, typical design. This one is the Writers Union of Artistic, the Union of Artists and Writers of Cuba, that at the same time is working in this idea. At the same time is promoting some literary work, but at the same time is banning and censorship any other artistic expression. And the same 1971 year was the demonstration of that, when they tried to ban some book of the same Eberto Padilla, Anton Arrufat, and I don't remember other writer and poet of that time. There are many, in fact. So I work always with these symbols. These symbols, and at the same time, I call it the icons of repression, because in their intention, in the intention of demonstrating or to promote legitimate culture, at the same time they are banning other one. This one is another design based in las lacras sociales. Lacras is a kind of undesirable in Cuba, and they were colored like that. It was in a special department in the Ministry of Interior for the undesirable, that in many cases they were homosexual, Jehovah's Witness, Catholic people, in fact, this kind of social dissidents, because not only Cuban government was looking for political dissident, also they were looking for social dissidents, and these are the so-called lacras, under undesirable people. Here also we have a certain institution that they were part of this propaganda system. This is the Ministry of Culture in the left area in the top, MINCULT, MININT, Ministry of Interior, MINREX, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MINET, Ministry of Education, MINFAR is the Ministry of Armed Forces, and MINSAP is the Ministry of Health Care, Ministerio de Salud Pública. The interesting thing is that these are the brands that export somehow the success of the Cuban Revolution. Success in military stuff, success in foreign policy, success in culture, success in education, success in healthcare. But at the same time, they have a dark side inside everything. Now, today, what we are talking about, you see in the headlines everywhere about war and everything between Russia and Ukraine, I think it's interesting to know why this kind of war, that specific war that is happening today, is referring to this kind of problems. Omission, telling other history, faking the history. It's very important to understand that this war is already started a long time ago, because this is a work also of symbol. This is a war of delegitimize the other, to put it in the other side, to not believe their history. You have the monopoly of your own history with your own instrument, and then you create that fake narrative. Fake news is something that for us, for Cubans, at the same time, we can say for the Russian, this is a very old stuff for us. I even don't like very much the term fake news, because it's very related with propaganda. And we have that from long time ago, when it's the totally delegitimation, sorry, to not legitimize the other one. It's just to make them invisible, make them zero. It's very funny how, and it's very interesting how yesterday Amnesty International was talking about the situation of Cuban political prisoners. And it's very interesting how Amnesty International, for instance, this NGO is not able to recollect or to see what is happening inside Cuban prisons. Cuba is the only country in the Americas that is not permitted to visit by Amnesty International. And this is one of the interesting things, how the information is banned from public opinion and an international opinion. Boletín Informa Cultura, it was this magazine when appeared the text of Alberto Padilla in 1971, when he made his repentance letter. Oh, I confess the worst crimes. I am the worst person. I treated revolution very unfair. He's saying these such things. I myself, I was a traitor with my comments. I don't going to do it again. This kind of letter that it was imposed, and it was made by basically by the state security police inside Villa Marista, and said, you have to say this to the rest of the world. You have to rehabilitate yourself, and you have to convene your friends to rehabilitate against negative commentary of the revolution. But Boletín Informa Cultura, it was this bulletin, it was this pamphlet that bring that speech, that specific speech of Alberto Padilla in the 1971, and it was spread around all Cuban embassies and also inside Cuban cultural institution. And I work with this yellow design of that appear in the original material. We see here, this is from the 1980, from the Mariel crisis, the embassy of Peru, we call it in Cuba the Embajada del Perú crisis, the Peruvian embassy crisis. Que se vaya la escoria, que se vaya la escoria. Escoria is just literally the scum. And they were referring at the same time to those people that they were basically this dissidents of a Cuban society dissidents, as I call it. Pimps, prostitutes, drunk people, criminals with minor criminals offense, but at the same time, gays, lesbian, they always were the target of Cuban Revolution, and also artists, of course. I always forgot to remember that I'm so embedded in artists that sometimes I forget to talk about them. That they were this scum. It was basically that layer of society that it was already in charge, that was already surviving in the Cuban, inside the Cuban Revolution, inside the Cuban social process, because the first political opponents, they were already in exile. They left year after year in the early 60s to basically Miami, New York, Spain, Caracas, Venezuela, and also Mexico. But this slogan is very strong, because basically it's putting the size of the Cuban government, you know, get out of here, you scum. We need that they get out. And Fidel Castro was in charge of this. The symbol here also is marked with the Soviet friendship with Cuba. Sometimes symbols are not so deep in their historical meaning, but at the same, yes. And I just work with this fundamental idea of layers and that. Also, yes, we can see here but I was referring to the decree 349 and 370, this work here specific. And also in this work here in this side, in the middle, we see also a direct reference to the cultural activist group like el Movimiento de San Isidro and 27N, 27 de noviembre, which they oppose directly to the long tradition of Cuban repression against artists and cultural groups. So Movimiento de San Isidro, which is one of the most relevant cultural and oppositionist movement in Cuba, emerging in 2018 after the decree 349, and 27 de noviembre emerging after a hunger strike and protest that was in Havana by the Movimiento de San Isidro. So they are very interconnected. To not tell you the story so long, basically, I just make a reference of a commentary of what those groups at the same time are referring to the rights, the civic right that they have to protest and claim for their rights in the area of the Cuban Constitution. Basically, they were claiming for their own right that they were legitimate, and they were proclaimed by the Cuban Constitution, and then the Cuban government denied them the right. As you see here, all symbols are full of stories, inner stories, minimal stories, big stories. It's a bit complicated because we can spend days and days and hours talking about the historical background of any symbol, of any personality, of any of these icons. So I try to go there, but always I try to also bring new ideas about these stereotypical icons of Cuban revolution, like Fidel, like Guevara, like communist symbols. I try to break this kind of stereotypes that not only they were exposed by the Cuban government, but also by foreign and also international public opinion. There is a kind of misconception of what we are living there and what Cuban, the Cuban that are in the streets are understanding this. I'm going to mention again, as maybe you don't know those icons, but don't worry, many of the Cubans also don't know it. So it's about that.